Hey, my lovely, lovely, wonderful people. A pleasant evening to everybody. So I was looking on the Jamaica Observer online, and I saw two interesting articles, and I'm going to deal with this one first. It says, "What will Caribbean reparation mission to Europe gain?" I know I have made a few posts on same, and I've given my 2 cents on how I think the money is, if we are to get it, as the descendants, how it should be allocated. My little 2 cents. I'm not a financial guru, but one of the things I know is this: people do not want to just to be educated. They want to be heard, and their hearing must be something tangible. They must see action behind the hearing. you know. So, for example, if we were to get the reparation money, I remember one particular judge had stated that it should go to, let us say, the infrastructural development and the improvement of like hospitals, schools, and so on, which I agree with. Improvement in the schools system, improvement in the hospital system, anything to fight against crime and violence and so on, things like those. However, for once in the lives of the Jamaican people, and I'm speaking to our Jamaican people, not to say that I don't care about any other country, but Paul says, help the household of faith first. I'm going to employ that methodology and say, it's because I'm Jamaican, I'm going to help and speak to my people first so that we can give out to other countries. Allow the people to pocket some of the monies, because all of us, our ancestors, everyone, had to toil, had to go through the battering and the beating and the abuse and the narcissism and the arrogance so that we could live a fair enough life today. Let us look at what the article says. So give people money individually, every single Jamaican, every single Jamaican barring none. Give them a change out personally, not just, deal with it societally, but individually as well. That's my view. It doesn't matter if you feel that the people are going to squander it. That is not your concern. We concern with things that should not concern us. There are things that you do that you should not be doing, and yet we don't concern ourselves with it. Next week, leaders in the regional slavery reparation movement will be heading to Europe for a series of political engagements organized by the Repair campaign, a movement carrying forward the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice. The delegation, which will attempt to inject a new burst of energy into the calls for compensation for the ills of chattel slavery and colonialism, will meet with European parliamentarians in Brussels on Tuesday and British members of Parliament in London the next day. The inevitable question will be what can realistically be the expected outcome of this trip. Will it be worth the plane fares, hotel rooms, ground transportation, meals, time away from work, and per diem for 7 people? Good question. The reparation issue has always been a controversial one, with no shortage of cynics who believe it's a grand waste of time, effort, and money because the descendants of slave owners do not hold themselves accountable and cannot be compelled to do so. Let me pause here a little bit and let me ask a question, and I really am not being facetious and I'm not being ridiculous. If, for example, your parent did wrong by somebody and you came up and you did not do wrong, do you think that people should hold you accountable for your parents' wrong? You don't believe in every man should sit on its own, every bottom should sit on its own tub, so every man pay for his or her own crime or sins or infractions committed. I can understand if you say the descendants, out of compassion, probably should be moved to see in what ways they can help, because they can't change history. They can't recourse it. They can't change it and let it go into another direction. History is what it has been. And that's a reality that we just have to face and accept. So, my question is, would you want them to, and I'm talking about the part when they said to do not hold themselves accountable, because the accountability part sounds as if, they were the ones who instigated their foreparents to do the damage that they had done to us when they did not. You know what I mean? So that is why I asked the question. If your parents do something bad, would you want to be held accountable? And I'm not talking about you deciding out of compassion and out of maybe being culpable, feeling guilty, I should say. Maybe you just take on that guilt, that self-guilt, or false guilt perhaps, to say, boy, my parents did wrong, so I have to make it right. I can understand you saying, all right, my parents did wrong, and out of compassion and out of the sense of decency and integrity, I'm going to. But the accountability part, no, that is like saying, hold an innocent man guilty. Think about what I'm saying deeply. Anyway, it says, still there are the optimists who are convinced that the descendants of slaves will never take their rightful place in the human family until they are enabled to overcome the lingering effects of slavery and colonialism. Believers argue, and they have the considerable backing of the Caribbean community and the University of the West Indies, the UWI, that more than 10 million Africans were stolen from their homes and forcefully transported to the Caribbean as the enslaved chattel and property of Europeans. The transatlantic slave trade is the largest forced migration in human history and has no parallel in terms of man's inhumanity to man. I don't know if I would want to say that, because some of the things that people have done to people, it's just that because slavery was on a wider cross section, meaning it was a multiplicity of people being abused, being treated inhumane. But I won't say that you can't make comparison, because if you know what some people are going through today, they can probably identify with what slaves are going through. We don't know. We can't make that assumption. That is one thing I'm not going to do. This trade in enchained bodies was a highly successful commercial business for the nations of Europe. The lives of millions of men, women, and children were destroyed in search of profit. The descendants of these stolen people have a legal right to compensation, which I probably can see with that aspect of it, They insist. As evidence, they often point to the underdevelopment of the black-dominated countries, mainly in Africa and the Caribbean, with little if any breakthroughs over the centuries despite no lack of effort. Some also posit that the world would be a better and more prosperous place if African descendants were able to lift up themselves through improved financial, health, and educational arrangements, and so contribute more. In its 10-point plan, CARICOM, which has established an active reparation commission, CRC, put the burden squarely on Europe, saying that they were the owners and traders of enslaved Africans and created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for their enslavement. CARICOM also lashed slave-owning European nations for refusing to compensate the enslaved with the ending of their enslavement, while compensating the slave owners at emancipation for the loss of legal property rights in enslaved Africans. They then imposed a further 100 years of racial apartheid upon the emancipated, imposed for another 100 years policies designed to perpetuate suffering upon the emancipated, and have refused to acknowledge such crimes or to compensate victims and their descendants. The delegation to Europe will press home the argument that their call for justice is the basis of the closure they seek to the terrible tragedies that engulfed humanity during modernity. I'm hoping that it will be fruitful, and as I said, that all the Caribbean islands and countries will get the reparation. Infrastructure and other will be improved, and people will get money individually in their pockets. That's my take on it. Guys, you know what to do with TikTok and YouTube. Subscribe. Give me one of those lions. Thank you.